There's a moment in 1258 that most people have never heard of, and I think about it every single time I open YouTube. Hulagu Khan's Mongol army has just broken through the walls of Baghdad. What follows is 13 days that historians still reach for superlatives to describe. The population, estimates range from 200,000 to 800,000 people, massacred, palaces leveled, mosques destroyed, hospitals gutted. Then they get to the libraries. Baghdad had 36 public libraries. At the center of it all was Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, the greatest intellectual institution the medieval world had ever produced. 5 centuries of accumulated manuscripts, Greek philosophy, Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics, original research that existed in no other copy anywhere on Earth. The Mongols threw it all into the Tigris River. Eyewitness accounts say the water ran black with ink. So many books hit the river that, according to one chronicler, you could walk across them on horseback. Now, here's the question nobody ever asks about that day. What survived? Not a manuscript, not a building, not a single brick of the House of Wisdom. Something smaller, invisible, already loose in the world, already embedded in European Latin, already traveling through monastery scriptoria in England and France, 300 years before the Mongols ever arrived. A word, a man's name, technically, mangled by Latin translators until it was unrecognizable, reshaped by French scholars who mistook it for Greek, quietly migrating through centuries of mathematical textbooks until it landed, in every line of code, in every recommendation engine, in the invisible machinery that decides what you see, what you buy, who you date. The word is algorithm, and it is, in every meaningful sense, the name of a man who worked in Baghdad around 825 CE. The man from Khwarazm. His full name was Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. The last part means the one from Khwarazm, a region in what is now Uzbekistan. He was Persian, born around 780 CE. By around 820 CE, Caliph al-Ma'mun had appointed him to the House of Wisdom. I want to be precise about what that place actually was because the popular image, a grand library full of scrolls, undersells it badly. The House of Wisdom was the world's first state-funded multidisciplinary research institution. Scholars were recruited from across the known world regardless of religion. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, they were paid salaries, given resources, given time. Al-Ma'mun himself, according to a widely repeated account, once paused a military campaign against the Byzantines because he wanted a specific manuscript more than he wanted the war. That's the environment Al-Khwarizmi worked in, and what he did there was extraordinary. He synthesized 3 intellectual traditions that had never been properly combined: Greek mathematical rigor, logical proof, systematic demonstration, Indian numerical innovation, the Hindu positional system with 10 digits including 0, which the Indian mathematician Brahmagupta had formalized in 628 CE, and Persian astronomical precision. He built something new on top of all of it. Around 825 CE, he produced 2 texts that would permanently alter the architecture of mathematics. The first title contained the phrase Al-Jabr. When European scholars translated it into Latin 3 centuries later, Al-Jabr became algebra. The second text introduced Europe to the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, and the story of what happened to that text, and to Al-Khwarizmi's name inside it, is the story of how a word outlives everything. The book that crossed civilizations. Here is why Al-Khwarizmi's arithmetic treatise mattered so much to medieval Europe. They were doing math in Roman numerals, and Roman numerals have a structural flaw that makes complex calculation nearly impossible. There is no 0, no place value. Try multiplying 14 by 48 without converting first. Try doing long division. You essentially cannot. The Hindu-Arabic system, 0 through 9, positional notation, makes all of this trivial, which is why, in the Islamic world, mathematics had run so far ahead. Algebra, trigonometry, systematic equation solving, none of that computational infrastructure existed yet in Latin Europe. Toledo, Spain in the 12th century is where this changes. After Christian forces captured Toledo in 1085, European scholars realized they were sitting on the largest Arabic library in the Western world. They flooded in. A 12th century English scholar named Adelard of Bath, who had spent years learning Arabic specifically to access Islamic science, is the scholar most likely responsible for translating al-Khwarizmi's arithmetic treatise into Latin around 1120. Scholars note the attribution isn't proven beyond dispute, but the Cambridge manuscript opening with Dixit algorithme, thus spoke al-Khwarizmī, is the earliest surviving trace of the name in European Latin. The Latin title the work was later given, Algorithmi de Numero Indorum, means algorithme on the Hindu numbers. Algorithme is not a Latin word, it is not a concept. It is al-Khwarizmi's name, mangled, approximated, but still, underneath the mistransliteration, still him. The word algorismus, a corruption of that Latinized name, begins spreading through European mathematical texts. By around 1225, it appears in Middle English in a text called the Ancrene Wisse, where it refers to the decimal numeral system. A century later, Chaucer uses a variant, algorithme, in the Canterbury Tales, describing counting stones. By 1596, the English scholar Thomas Hood uses the modern spelling, algorithm. The word has been loose in the English language for 4 centuries, and al-Khwarizmi has been dead for 700 years. The river ran black. Back to 1258. The house of wisdom burns. The Tigris runs black. Al-Khwarizmi's original manuscripts, the physical objects he wrote, are almost certainly in that river. The institution that hired him, the city that made him, the civilization that funded him, gone in 13 days. Here is what I find genuinely hard to process about this. The word had already escaped. More than a century before Hulagu Khan arrived at the gates of Baghdad, al-Khwarizmi's name had been carried into Latin. By 1258, algorismus was already in use at the University of Paris, already being copied by hand in monastery scriptoria across England, France, and Italy. The Mongols destroyed everything in Baghdad, but they could not go back to Toledo in 1120 and stop a scholar from writing a name in Latin. You can burn a library. You cannot unname a word. There is a secondary layer here that rarely gets discussed. Roshdi Rashed, the French-Egyptian historian of mathematics at France's Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique and the foremost living scholarly authority on al-Khwarizmi, has argued extensively in his 2009 work, Al-Khwarizmi, The Beginnings of Algebra, that al-Khwarizmi's contribution to mathematical thought is still systematically underestimated in Western histories of science. Not because the knowledge disappeared, but because, once translated into Latin, it stopped being attributed to its source. European mathematicians built on it for centuries, and the man's name quietly dissolved, except inside the word. That's the only place it survived intact. The Mongols ended Baghdad. They did not end what Baghdad had built, because some of what Baghdad built had escaped into the language of the civilization that would eventually build the internet. One man, 2 words, the entire internet. This is the part that stops me. One man, Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. His name, mangled through Latin, gives us algorithm. His book title, Al-Jabr, gives us algebra. The 2 most foundational words in modern mathematics and computer science. Both of them from the same Persian scholar, from the same 9 years of work in 9th century Baghdad. When Donald Knuth published The Art of Computer Programming in 1968, the book that is, without real exaggeration, the foundational text of modern computer science, he built his entire framework around the concept of the algorithm. And in that book, he acknowledged where the word came from. Al-Khwarizmi, Baghdad, the 9th century. The credit is in there, in a footnote, in a book most people have never opened. Now think about what algorithm means in the world you actually live in. Not in a textbook, in your daily life. The algorithm that decides which video plays next on YouTube, the one that prices your Uber before you confirm the ride, The one that determines which posts you see on Instagram, which news gets surfaced, which job applications a company's software ranks before a human looks at them, which faces a law enforcement system flags. Every one of those systems is, at its foundation, a finite sequence of precise steps that transforms an input into an output, which is exactly what Al-Khwarizmi described: a method, a procedure, a recipe for solving a problem that reaches the same result every time you run it. The word for the thing running the modern world is his name. He worked in a library that no longer exists, in a city razed to the ground. His original manuscripts are at the bottom of a river, and his name is on servers on every continent. The ghost in the machine. I keep coming back to one image. A scholar in Toledo somewhere around 1120. He has an Arabic manuscript in front of him. He's working through it line by line, rendering it into Latin for an audience that doesn't read Arabic. He reaches the author's name, Al-Khwarizm, and has to approximate it in a script that has no equivalent sounds. He writes algorithme. He doesn't know he's naming the internet. He's just doing his job, getting the name approximately right, moving to the next line. But that approximation, one imperfect transcription of one name from one language to another, is the moment the word enters the world. The Baghdad library survives and nothing else. Not a single stone, not a single original manuscript. But that name crossed into Latin and never came back. Every time an algorithm decides what you see, what you buy, who you meet, or what you believe, there is a name inside that word. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, from Khwarazm, Baghdad, 825 CE. They burned his library. They threw his books in a river. The water ran black. They didn't burn his name.